What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another new episode of the Pack a Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on X at Andy Herman NFL. You know my guest. He's the one and only Justis Mosqueda. You can find him on Twitter or X at JUMOSQ. You can find him, of course, at the Acme Packing Company, doing a tremendous job every single day of covering the Green Bay Packers. So happy to be back chatting with him here on the show. Justis, how the heck have you been?
I've been great. We signed a safety. That's all I asked for during the free agency process. So couldn't be better.
I am right there with you. I was like, it felt like a completely unrealistic expectation of like, yeah, go get Xavier McKinney, even though he's like the perfect fit and he was out there in free agency and everything about it just felt right. Like, what are the odds that of all teams that actually gets him, it's going to be the Green Bay Packers? But it was, in fact, the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, a lot that happened in week one. I know a lot of it's been dissected already, sort of to death, but would want to get your thoughts. And if you just had like sort of one overarching huge takeaway from a very crazy and chaotic week one of Green Bay Packers free agency, what would that takeaway be?
Oh, I mean, the Packers were aggressive. I guess if we're doing one takeaway, I mean, even I know they haven't signed a linebacker, and the linebacker market is like pretty dry at this point. In terms of like veterans who have actually played a decent amount of snaps. But they try to go after Josie Jewell, right? They brought back a starting nickel. They added a starting running back. They added a starting safety. Like they've been kicking around these tires. They've looked at other safeties other than just McKinney. So, maybe there's another safety signing down the line that could possibly happen. Yeah, I mean, they've been aggressive. They understood where the holes on their team are, and they've tried to address them.
Yeah, I think the aggressiveness is exciting. I think I talked to Aaron Nagler about this a little bit on Monday's show, but it feels like they are really rounding out this incredible foundation of a team that is all like 27 or under. I know there's a Kenny Clark and a Preston Smith and so on and so forth, but for the most part is on the same timeline. And you add two players that are within that. It's not like they went out and signed a couple of 31-year-old players or something like that on like 1 or 2 year deals. They got premium players in Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney that fit within that timeline, that fit within holes that they had on the team, and should be able to come in and make a pretty significant impact. And I talk about too, like, I think the ceiling is higher from adding these two big time players, especially on the back end of the defense and Xavier McKinney. I could not be more excited about either of these guys.
Yeah, and I think they have a little bit more money to play around with too.
Yep.
I think it was Spot Track had the Packers with like 25 million, and I don't know if they're counting the Keyshawn Nixon deal in there. I don't know if we still know the details of the Keyshawn Nixon deal.
Nope, not as of recording this. Nope.
Yeah, so that one should impact a little bit, but then you're going to get the post June 1 money at some point from the Devondre stuff, right? And that should help sign Jordan Love. This team has $90 million in cap space next year, not including whatever they roll over from this season. So yeah, I mean, they're adding guys, and there's not that many holes left on the team. And they should have even more money to play around with next season. So, either retaining their own guys or, adding outside free agents. It'll be interesting what they do. But they have a very solid foundation, and they just kind of said, to hell with it. I mean, why do we need cap space in the next 2 years? We don't. So let's not guarantee a bunch of money. But like, okay, Josh Jacobs wants 24 million in the first 2 years. Give it to him. Xavier McKinney wants I don't know. I think it was like 36 or something like that.
Sounds right.
First 2 years. Like, give it to him. You need a safety. Yep. There's not that many safeties in the draft. Like, I don't know if anyone's been paying attention to the safety market in terms of the draft guys, but like here, I'll go on the consensus draft board right now, so I'm not talking out of my ass. The top safety is Nubin, sorry, from Minnesota, had the same surgery that Bakhtiari just had, in terms of clearing out the meniscus issue and making it smooth, right? Didn't run at his pro day, didn't run at the combine. Kitchens ran very slow, right? The kid from Miami, which I don't think is a disqualifier, but I would be pretty surprised if he's in the top 45 conversation at this point.
Hey,
Um,
I have a bonus question for you here, based off
go
of
for it.
that, because this is going to be a fun one. I actually have an episode coming out on Thursday that goes onto this in very, very great detail. All right, so I think Kinchins was like a 1.98 relative athletic score or something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
something in that range. All right, can you name the 4 Green Bay Packers in Goody's entire draft history that had an under 5 relative athletic score? There are 4 under 5 RAS scores total. And
I
nobody, like one more thing, nobody under a 3.58. That was his lowest one ever. So like if you're looking for somebody under a 5 relative athletic score, it doesn't happen. And just to even give you a little bit more of a hint here, we're looking at fifth round pick, sixth round pick, seventh round pick as these. He dabbling in that sort of range for non-athletic players in day 1 and 2. Goody's just not doing it.
Yeah. Um, I know I've looked at it in the past, and it's usually guys who don't turn out very well. My first guess honestly would have been Amari, but you just said fifth round pick, fifth round pick.
He was their
Um,
6th worst relative athletic score ever. Their 5th worst, and he had a 5.56. Their 5th worst was Jay Sternberger with a 5.24. And then it was
I know Ford is there. Ford is in there
Yep.
somewhere.
Shamar is a 4.56,
Yeah,
was one
okay.
of those 4.
Makes
Cole,
sense.
Cole Madison with a 4.42. Jake Hansen with a 3.73. And then your favorite, Jonathan Ford, with a 3.58. The only 4 players that they've ever taken with a relative athletic score under 5. It's not to say that couldn't happen or whatever, but it's basically just like off the board at that point.
Right. So we're getting injury issue with Nubin, athleticism questions with Kinchins. Javon Bullard, the kid out of Georgia, I think has had a pretty good pre-draft process. I think
Yep.
stock is up there. But he was talked about as, potentially a third round guy coming into the offseason. Who knows, maybe he sneaks in the second stuff now. Kalen Bullock, the USC kid, showed up lighter and slower than people thought. Everyone thought, hey, super young, super athletic kid, he's gonna need a redshirt year, but like, um, he's a developmental prospect.
Yep.
And that's basically all the guys in like the top 100 that people are talking about, like for sure top 100. So yeah, a lot of question marks in the safety market. So I'm happy they were just like, to hell with it. Like,
Yep.
pay McKinney whatever he wants. We don't need the cap space in the next 2 years. If he's overpaid by year 3, talk to him about a pay cut at that
Yep.
point. But like, he's gonna be what, 26 at that point. Like, it's not like we're talking about a dude who's gonna be in his 30s. So
No, not at all. He's going to be in the prime of his career. And, even then, like if you have to do it 3 years and it ends up being like not a terrible deal anyway, like that's in the cap's only going to go up. These safety contracts are going to continue to go up. I don't foresee any issue with it whatsoever. I want to talk to you specifically because you're so good at this. I want to talk to you specifically about the fit of Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney. And I know you obviously went and watched these guys in great detail already. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Josh Jacobs and his fit within the Matt LaFleur offense. How do you envision that working? And, just kind of what do you think we'll see from him?
yeah, it's interesting. Their run game was a little bit different in Oakland. Oh goodness. Las
Vegas.
Vegas. Um, they were a little bit more like I formation type of run game, I guess is the way to put it. Like, they ran more ISO. They ran a lot of duo, which like the Packers do a little bit, but like not nearly as much as they do. They didn't really run pin and pull stuff, which is, a lot of what the Packers do in terms of trying to get their guys to the edge and stuff like that. Um, what I saw though that was most important out of his film was that he got better at about mid-season. I know a lot of people will point to the numbers and stuff like that and say like, yeah, he had a down year. If you look like from week 8 on, he actually had a pretty good run, and I think it showed up on the film too. Um, the problem is he got hot for about 5 weeks and then ended up getting hurt with that quad injury, and
Yep.
you never know what the heck is happening, especially at that position when a guy's playing on a franchise tag. How many times have we seen, running back in a contract year kind of hold up a little bit because he knows like the wear and tear at that position, man. Like, they'll
Yep.
eat you alive, and you really only got one shot to go to market ever, right?
Yep.
At that spot. So I don't know how much of that had to play in anything. I know I listened to the presser that he had in the Packers locker room, and he was talking about the offense, and he was like, "Dude, we went into the year and we had no idea what our identity was going to be, and we kind of built that at around mid-season, and stuff started looking better." Um, he had I can't remember who it was on the offensive line. There was one guy on the offensive line who was a total liability, and then Michael Mayer, the tight end, the rookie tight end, actually had a pretty rough go of it. I thought at the first half of the season too. So yeah, I mean, you had two guys that were just blowing blocks pretty consistently. Um, I think he has better football in him than what his numbers suggested, and the Packers obviously must think that too, based off the contract that they gave him.
Yeah, that offensive line. Colton Miller was mostly fine. Dylan Parham, Andre James was fine. Greg,
Parham, it was
yeah,
Parham.
and
Parham
yeah,
looks like he does not belong in the National Football League. And Michael Mayer is young, so like you're not going to cut bait with him. But like he had a rough go of it in the run game too.
Greg Van Rotten at right guard a lot did not look great in that, and then Illuminor at right tackle for some of that too. I posted a ton of clips, and I've been very clear. Like, I did not just cherry pick clips. I could have posted way more, but like, and I'm sure you saw it too, of like Jacobs gets the handoff and there's at minimum like a guy waiting for him in the backfield. And there are times where like he'll make a guy or two miss and there's just like two more waiting for him. And it's like,
Yeah.
there's so many just dead on arrival plays in that, where even though like there's times again that he's making people miss, like it's a negative 3 yard gain and there's so many of them, like of course his average is going to suck. Like we're not talking about like 1 yard gains here that like stack up over time. We're talking about like negative 3-4 yard gains that again he had no factor in whatsoever.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't help you had Aiden O'Connell under center,
No.
right? So
Or Jimmy Garoppolo for that, man. I mean, even before that,
yeah,
like
like
the whole thing.
yeah. Prayers up for Devontae.
Yeah,
Free,
seriously.
free my guy.
Wait, Vay. I do want to ask you this because I did notice as well they did more fullback stuff with
Yeah,
Josh Jacobs
for
certainly
sure.
than Green Bay does. There's
And
no
I think that was a little bit of a holdover too from like the Gruden era stuff,
I'm
right? Like
sure.
they did that with him, and then McDaniels comes in, they start doing some Patriot stuff, and yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure, use the fullback more.
There's no Josiah DeGuara on the roster. Your guy, Henry Pearson. Is there a world in which Henry Pearson gets a look because maybe Josh Jacobs says, "Hey, I really like fullbacks. Like I really like having the lead blocker. Works really well for me." Could you see him like somebody now that could potentially have a role on this team?
Yeah, and fullback is such a weird position because it hasn't really died the way that people think it has died in the NFL. It's just there's not designated fullbacks a lot. Like there's a lot of tight
Right.
ends who play in the backfield and
Big
just
time.
like get those snaps because fullbacks aren't getting a ton of carries. So what do they need to do? They need to block and they need to catch the ball. Well, tight ends can do that. And
Yep.
they're usually, lengthier, bigger guys, right? So I think a guy like um, a guy like Kraft can do that. I think a guy like Sims can do that. I think a guy like Pearson can do that. The Packers have shown that a little bit in the preseason a couple times. Like I think it was the first preseason game this past year. They were like I formation a ton of the game. And I was
Yeah.
like, is this what we're about to see? And then, the next two preseason games, they basically run none of that. And, regular season, the regular season, they did that like two fullback look. Remember in like week 1 and they were running like play action shots off of it. And then we
Yeah,
just
very
like
much so.
never saw that again. And I
They
was
just
like,
toyed with the Bears in week 1. They just put a bunch of stuff out there. I don't think they care. They're just having fun.
yeah. So I think it's tough to pin down stuff, but like if they want to do that, they have internal options to do it. I don't know what the fullback market looks like right now in terms of the draft or anything like that. But yeah, if they want to go down that road, I think they'd be able to do that. The biggest thing to me is their offensive line kind of like does like one run game install different every year, right? We're like, what was it? 2 years ago it was pin and pull. Last year they really got into the counter game. Um, maybe that's something that they want to add to it, but like you can't really like you can't get good at everything in
Right.
terms of the run game. Like you kind of got to pick a couple schemes and just say like this is what we're going to be good at. So like maybe they do run ISO and they try to run more power and stuff like that, but I think that comes at a cost of like all right, we're not running inside zone anymore. And if you're not running inside zone, you're probably getting out of the RPO game pretty much entirely out of the shotgun, because that's
Yeah.
virtually what everyone runs. So I think you gotta pick and choose. You don't have enough time for everything to get good at it, at least at the NFL level. Like the Raiders ran all that stuff. They didn't run that much stretch. They didn't run much,
No, not at all.
gun zone and stuff like that. Like there's a reason why, teams kind of have to develop an identity in the run game.
I'll ask, I don't have any concern about Josh Jacobs making that transition into this style of run game. Is there any concern? I think he's going to fit great.
Yeah, I mean, the more underrated thing about him too is like, so he can do like the outside zone, inside zone stuff. He can be a one cut runner if you need him to do that and all that. The underrated thing about his game is you forget that he's 220 pounds, right? And you're like, that's a big boy. If you can get him going, that's a pretty impressive thing. I do kind of wonder, like, what do we think about LaFleur's style of running back at this point? Like, do we think he wants the big boys?
I know Goody said they want some power mixed in. I don't know. That's a great question. I think he wants somebody that at least can be a playmaker. And I think probably them seeing how valuable Aaron Jones was to the entire offense and was just like the skeleton key that unlocked everything. It's like we saw flashes of Jordan playing well before like Jones got in his rhythm at the end of the year. But it's like once Jones was in the rhythm and like Love found his rhythm, it was like good luck stopping that offense with any level of consistency. And I think the bigger thing is like they just wanted a similar type of playmaker, but probably that they could rely upon for 17 games if at all possible. That to me is my take on it. But I mean, it does seem like they do like some form of strong, physical, big running back if they can also make him a playmaker.
Yeah. And, again, you lock him up long term too. I think that's part of the conversation with turning over from Jones and stuff like that. I think if they really wanted to work it out with Jones, they would have figured it out. So
I think so too. I think that's totally true. Let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. Xavier McKinney, we've all talked about. He feels like this very perfect fit for this defense. When Jeff Hafley describes a safety, it basically is a lot of what Xavier McKinney can do. But how do you see him specifically fitting into this defense? And what are some of the things that Jeff Hafley is going to be able to do with him and how they could use him?
Yeah, so we had this conversation like a week ago, I think, on one of your streams, and we were, talking about like, hey, because I think you mentioned something, you're like, Xavier McKinney, free safety. And I was like, do you think he's gonna play free safety? And you were like, do you not think he's gonna play free safety? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like he can kind of do a little bit of everything. And that Giants defense, he's kind of asked to do a little bit of everything because they're split high, they're blitz bluff, right? It's the whole Rex Ryan thing. It's like, are they coming or are they not? But they're presenting the threat of coming, right? And with that, they kind of played, left and right safety in that way. And Xavier McKinney in his availability in the locker room, what was it? Yesterday, 2 days ago? Time is fake at this point.
Friday.
He kind of said like he expects to kind of do a little bit of everything. So my assumption is that they're going to play left and right. And, they're just going to rock and roll the safeties based off of, how the offense lines up, basically, right? Do you show it? Do you roll it? If there's motion, you're not going to see a cornerback zip across the field. You're probably going to see the safeties roll, right?
Yep.
So I kind of think that they're probably looking at a more versatile safety at this point than like looking for a true strong safety. This is the guy who's going to play in the box, all that stuff. So like maybe that's when a guy like the kid from Georgia, Javon Bullard, right, becomes more of a premium to them because they're like, he's a guy who can kind of do both things, right? And that versatility now has value there.
It really does. And I think that would probably be my final answer is I want to see who the other safety is before I make any drastic judgments on what McKinney's going to be playing. My gut tells me is that it's probably at least 60-40 that he's playing more of like the free safety role. I do agree with you. I think a lot of it's going to be left and right, and they'll probably yo-yo those guys a little bit depending upon what opposing offenses are doing. But I think my guess is he's going to, no matter who they get in free agency or the draft to start across from him, my guess is he's going to be the better version of the deep safety role far more often than not. And I think they could potentially find somebody that could play a little bit closer to the line and still do it well. There are free agents out there I think would still be interesting. We'll see what they can do in the draft, but I do think if you could, to your point, if you could find somebody that is also extremely versatile and it's not as much of a tell of like, oh, yeah, McKinney's probably going to go back, 80% of the time, that makes your defense a little bit more, complex, or at least, more difficult to sort of hone in on for opposing offenses.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in today's NFL, I really do think that makes a lot of sense. There's so much motion that you can't really control what the strength, like what the run strength or pass strength of a team is going to be, even based off of a pre-snap look. Like,
Yep.
how many times are we going to see like double motions and stuff like that, or just full on shifts, or that little Miami motion that teams are running now and stuff like that. Like, it's just too difficult to pin down. Like, this is the strong side, right? Like, strong right. Let's all line up so that that we want the strong side on the right. Like, that's just not how this works anymore.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And hopefully they do bring in someone with versatility. I might have a name I'm excited about to talk about in just a couple of questions here. But before we get there, I do want to ask you how you're feeling about this linebacker position. You mentioned the free agency class is basically gone. You've got really nothing left. There's an Isaiah Simmons out there. I'm not sure what that does for anyone. What is it? Cunningham from the Eagles this past year. He's out there. There's nothing left. And this feels like it has to be obviously Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, and probably draft, and maybe somebody gets released or something happens, but there's not much left out there.
Yeah, and Aaron Nagler was in my mentions talking about a potential trade and stuff like that. So I went kind of down that road to try to look at like who's even like available or anything like that. It was funny because it's like the guy that they would trade for, I think, to your point that you made earlier, right? Like looking at young guys, guys who are like 26 and younger and stuff like that, right? The guy who makes the most sense would have been like Dre Greenlaw, but Dre Greenlaw just popped his Achilles.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that? I think if you're looking at guys right now who are on like expiring deals, basically like Ernest Jones, the kid out of the Rams.
Yep.
He probably makes the most sense. But outside of that, like there's not many good young linebackers in this league to even like trade for. Like it's not a strong position of the league right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way, college plays their defenses, and like everyone's running the mint tight stuff, which is just like, jam up the inside of the, the interior with defensive line bodies and then just spill everything to the edge, run and chase. And like, okay, but you're doing that, but you're not getting under center play action from, these teams, right? So like these guys aren't developed like that. If you don't have to worry about play action, yeah, sure, cool, fun. Like that doesn't really translate to the NFL. So yeah, I think it's a pretty barren market right now. Even in the trade market, I'm not sure who you look at. It'll be interesting to see what they do. I mean, maybe they do just look at the draft market. Edgerrin Cooper's kind of an interesting guy. That's the, consensus number one linebacker in this class. They're apparently bringing him in on a top 30 visit. He's a guy who I think has to play will linebacker, at least in this scheme, for one of these super blitz heavy schemes. Like if you're, Baltimore or something like that, anyone off of the Rex Ryan tree, right? I think he can kind of play either outside linebacker position, but in this scheme, I think he has to play the will. And Silverstein reported that they want Quay to play the will. Yeah, so I don't know what they do, because if they're in the Mike market and they're looking for a Mike linebacker, because I don't know. I mean, maybe you're doing that with McDuffie. That pretty much means that he's going to be the green dot at that point. We'll see if that's actually what happens, because I know everyone's willing to anoint him as like the number 2 linebacker. I still think you want to get better there. Plus, he's on a 1-year deal, right? So like, I don't know. Competition probably would be warranted there. I don't know how Cooper and Quay fit in the same type of defense unless they're playing with Quay at the mic, which I personally, I just play Quay at the damn mic because he has the body for it and he has the athleticism for it. But I mean, I'm just a guy on the internet. So
it's going to be really interesting to see how they go about everything. My guess is this is draft and probably a guy within those first 5 picks. And then they probably draft another, maybe 1, maybe even 2 guys on like day 3. And they just
they're going to need bodies. I looked at, San Francisco the Jets, the Texans, how many guys they roster. Those guys keep like 6 backers, and the Packers have 3 right now. Basically, like
Yeah,
I'm not counting
Christian
Christian
Young.
Young.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not counting Christian Young. So like Welsh is gonna play special teams, right? You have McDuffie and you have Quay. You still need 3 more.
Yeah, and that's
Like they
that's
might take 3.
I wouldn't shock me at all. I
Yeah,
keep saying this though. I'm like, they could take like 4 offensive linemen. Then I'm like, they could take 3 off-ball linebackers. And I'm like, all right, well, that's 7 of your 11 right there. That sort of limits you. But they really don't need like a ton else.
yeah,
Like you could probably do like 4 offensive linemen, 3 off-ball linebackers, 2 safeties, and a running back. And like, what are you at? Isn't that like at 10 right there? So 7, 8, 9, 10.
yeah.
Like you could probably get away and like, just do that if you wanted to. Obviously, they're going to do some best player available stuff too, but yeah, they might go like bulk and like double up, triple up at some positions, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And just like last year, we panicked. They're going to need veteran wide receivers, and then they go and draft Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, and yeah, obviously get Malik Heath and undrafted, and they were fine. And like, oh, they're going to need tight ends, and then they go and draft Musgrave and Kraft and find Ben Sims out of nowhere, and they're fine. And on the defensive side of the ball, that hasn't always worked out quite as well for them as it sometimes has on the offensive side of the ball. But I think they're going to put some serious numbers in the draft at some of these defensive positions and competition. Hope for the best, and hope you don't end up with like a season of starting like Kamal Martin or Chris Barnes for a long period of time, because sometimes it doesn't always work out the best either.
Yeah, I guess the other option too is Eric Wilson's still out there, right? And he'll be able to contribute on special teams. He's played defense at least a little bit in Green Bay. Like maybe he's a guy that you want to bring back, and hey, he's going to help you on punt protection. He's going to play all these units, and if you need him to be the 4th linebacker off the bench, not that terrible. And if there's not, you don't find value at the linebacker position, like you didn't find value at the safety position last year, like I guess you can roll with him. So
I actually like Eric Wilson. He hits that magic number of 30. Would Goot do it? Would he put another 30-year-old on the roster? He turns 30 in September, but I actually think there's a decent chance that he's back, like captain of special teams, core guy there. And then he's always been a guy to me where like, if he's your 5th or 6th linebacker and it's like a break glass in case of emergency situation and you need someone like that, like I'm never like super worried when Eric Wilson is in there. Like it's not great, but it's fine. It's fine. So
Steady Eddie, he's an NFL player. He'll be able to contribute on teams. Like until those legs run out, like he's gonna find work somewhere.
Agreed. All right. Free agents that are still out there. Obviously, the market is pretty barren at this point. I'll give my spoiler. We were talking about the versatility of different players. Julian Blackmon's been a player that I've kind of been on since the start of free agency that I think can cover. I know he and McKinney had 2 of the best tackling rates of any safeties. Like imagine having 2 really good tackling safeties. Like that's unheard of in Green Bay. So I'm all in. And I think, again, the versatility there would be able to have both of those guys do a bit of everything. That's probably the number 1 guy on my list that is like semi-realistic, but anyone that's on your list that would potentially make some sense.
Yeah, I think the safety market is probably where you see the most opportunity right now. I know like Josh Jacobs got asked about like the running back market and what he thought about the running back market and all that stuff. And he was like, it's kind of cyclical. I think you're seeing it with safeties right now, which I think that's probably a conversation that he's had with his agent, right? That is kind of showing up. But if you're looking at the Packers positions and needs, safety is probably the one where like the most guys are still like left available. I know like Cameron Curl just signed and like stuff like that. But like, you brought up Blackmon. He's a guy who's still out there. As far as I know, Jordan Fuller is still out there. He's a guy who
Carolina Panthers. He did sign.
Did he sign? Okay.
Yep.
Fake news, Justis. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple guys like even like a Mike Edwards. Like if you're trying to go with like if you're trying to go with like a Jonathan Owens type of signing for this year, right? Like I think Mike Edwards is a guy who like if you're trying to develop a guy, you want a Bullock or something like that out of USC in the draft. Like a Mike Edwards is going to be able to at least give you that stopgap to give, a guy like Bullock a redshirt season or something like that. So I think there's safeties who are available for sure. Linebacker out of there. I mean, is tackle a position that we're possibly looking at for like a veteran guy? Like how long do we have to wait before we're like, is Nyman coming back?
I just talked about him too. I'm like, I've never been a huge Nyman guy, but like at this point, there's not much out there, and Green Bay really needs depth along the offensive line, and there's probably worse directions to go in at this point.
I
I
mean, you would
wouldn't.
think that if he's still out there right now, he's being thought of as a swing tackle anyway.
Yep.
So if he's going to be a swing tackle, and I think he's like 28, like at
Yeah.
that point, it comes down to money. And if Green Bay is the highest bidder, I mean,
So be it.
again, we have 25 million to spend in free agency in terms of the cap this year, right? And that's before, the post June 1 Devondre Campbell money comes in. Like, why are we holding on to it? Like, if we need a swing tackle, let's go grab a swing tackle.
Yep. I'm right there with you. Offensive line depth is another where even if you could get somebody like a Dalton Reisner to come in and compete, or like a
Yeah.
Yash Nyman to be your swing tackle, just something that you have a little bit extra there in case things go wrong, rather than having to rely on Luke Tenuta, Caleb Jones, Royce Newman, and a bunch of rookies. Like any one more player you could add to that room, I'd feel a whole heck of a lot better about, especially if they have starting experience. All right, last question before we get out of here. Chicago Bears are, in all likelihood, if they don't Chicago Bears this, going to take Caleb Williams, number 1 overall. The Minnesota Vikings are likely going to be on the move up the draft board. Maybe that's a Drake May. Maybe that's a JJ McCarthy. We will have to wait and see. But where are you at from a nervousness, excitement? Where are you at from, like, because this will change the NFC North one way or the other this offseason, I think, in a pretty significant way, when the Bears take a number 1 quarterback overall, and when the Vikings probably move up into the top 5 and take a really young quarterback. Where are you at with everything?
I mean, the Bears are still pretty far away,
Yep.
right? And I think they only have 4 draft picks right now as it
Something
stands
like 4 or
today.
5. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the team that you're seeing right now, plus Caleb Williams, is basically where you're going to see in the regular season. So, you know, Caleb can be good, right? I generally would be surprised if rookie quarterbacks are good out of the gate. So I'm not that worried about that situation. The Vikings is highly dependent on what quarterback they get. Makes me worried. Um, Jane Daniels isn't a guy I'm a super big fan of.
Same here.
JJ McCarthy, buddy, if they trade up to like 4 for JJ McCarthy and trade like 3 first round picks for him, I will be elated.
Yeah.
Oh my god. But like if they move up and they can grab like a Drake May, I'd be like, oh crap, that's a really good spot for Drake May
Yep.
early on. Like he might be able to put up numbers with just all the weapons that are around. I mean, Addison, Jordan Jefferson, Aaron
Let's
Jones,
say it.
Hawkinson, good blockers on the offensive
Yeah.
line. Like that offensive line's gotten better recently. I don't know if they could play a lick of defense, but at least that offense will be able to put up points, right? I
Yep.
don't have that much anxiety because Andy, I have a quarterback, so I don't
Yeah,
have to
that's
really
true.
worry about that. If I were a Lions fan, though, probably be shaking in my boots at this point where I'm like, I'm gonna be in. Yeah, I mean, maybe the rookie quarterbacks, it's not the situation this year, but long term, if you have Goff at quarterback, you're gonna be at the quarterback disadvantage every single game in every single division game. Like, it's a bad
Because,
spot to be in.
yeah, it's not great. Especially when they are coming off a season when they were, potential Super Bowl contenders. It could be a very interesting division.
That
I'm
door closes so fast,
It really
so
does.
fast.
Yeah, and as much as I think, that I don't think Jared Goff gets enough credit as he deserves, especially how he's played the last couple of years. There's still probably a ceiling there that is just going to limit you in some capacity. And Detroit's, like you said, may learn that very fast, and just how quickly that door closes. I'm with you. I love Drake May. I think that would be a really good spot for him in Minnesota, which would not be ideal. Um, and then Caleb, I think he's going to be phenomenal. Like you said, maybe not year 1, but I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. Obviously, any of these guys could bust. Any of them could become amazing. NFL teams get this wrong more often than they get right, at that position. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the NFC North. But like you said, you can sleep a little easier at night, knowing that Jordan Love is Green Bay's quarterback, and there's less potential room for error and less questions going into this offseason with Green Bay, and you have to feel confident with him at the helm.
Speaking of quarterback, are we in the quarterback development market? Is this something that Goot might be able to do? Because the reason I bring this up, I had all the pro days that the Packers visited. I wrote that up on the site. I'm gonna do that like once a week, basically, and just do them in batches instead of just you know doing them like every day. But they were at South Carolina's pro day, South Carolina doesn't have very many prospects, and their top prospect's a wide receiver. You would think that the Packers aren't going to take, a second round wide receiver or something like that with how their roster is shaking up, right? The other guy that they have is Spencer Rattler, who's everyone is like, arm talent through the roof, probably needs to learn how to be a pro, all this stuff. Like, if we're there in the third, fourth round, and Spencer Rattler is there, and your backup quarterback, Sean Clifford, which, my opinion, again, this isn't sourced or anything like that. I'm just looking at how the draft kind of worked out last year. Like, there was a run on quarterbacks. They basically ran out of quarterbacks, and they kind of panic picked.
Took the last one on their board, probably.
Yeah. Who's a pre-draft visit and stuff for them. I wonder if they try to get better at that backup quarterback spot and say, hey, maybe we have a couple preseason showcases and stuff like that, and give them a chance. And the other thing too is Jordan Love played all of the games last year. That's not normal for an NFL quarterback. About half of NFL teams have to end up playing a second quarterback because of injury, specifically during a season. So you would have to think at some point Jordan is going to go down with some sort of an injury. Someone's going to have to come in. Like, everyone isn't, the Brett Favre career that we're conditioned to kind of believe in, where, everyone's an Iron Man and just pushes through stuff. So I wonder if they look at Rattler as a guy who's like, hey, this is a way to not pay a veteran $7 million to be a backup. And we might be able to, hey, take him in the fourth round 1 year and trade him for a second round pick a couple years down the line.
It would not surprise me at all on day 3 of the draft if they took a quarterback. In fact, I would probably put it at 60-40 that they do take a quarterback at some point on day 3. I just think, Goody's mentioned it already that they'd like to get back to sort of doing that. I don't think that Sean Clifford precludes you from taking a quarterback with upside at any point.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned,
I'd rather not play Sean Clifford for 2 to 3 games if at all possible.
Yeah. I actually liked what some of the stuff that Clifford did, but I'm with you. I think in a starting situation, it's going to be obviously a bit more of a struggle. But yeah, if they found somebody and they liked him, like a Rattler, fourth round, I'm totally cool with that. And it's so funny because I know the visceral reaction to you're using a fourth round pick on a quarterback when you have all these other holes on the team and you've got Jordan Love that you're going to give this 50.
They draft backups all the time.
Yeah, especially in day 3 of the draft, is just have fun, go find the best players, and position doesn't matter. And if you get a couple guys that work out, you're just happy, and it does not matter what positions they are whatsoever. So I have no issue with that. And I think it's a very strong possibility they take QB.
You're going to have 44 draft picks in a 4-year span. Guys are even going to get cut. There's guys who are just not going to make it. I'm okay with taking a backup quarterback, especially again, just look at what backup quarterbacks are making right now. There's veterans out there signing for $7 million to be a backup quarterback. This saves $6 million of cap space every year. Yeah.
If you said the over under on how many draft picks the Packers actually selected this year and set it at 11, I think I'd actually put it at over 11 too. Just knowing how good he works.
The only way it's under is if they use those picks to trade for veterans, I think.
Yeah.
That's because I don't think they're really going to be packaging picks. I see a scenario where they trade back from 25 a whole lot more likely than trading up from 25.
Yeah.
Right. And they already have a high second round pick. So it's not like you're going to package picks there. And then it becomes when do you need these picks? The only range that they're not picking in right now is the 5th round, right? Okay, maybe they want to go up and move up for a guy in the 5th, but that's kind of it.
I have one last fun question for you that will never come to fruition, but these are the exact sort of questions that you and I like to think about. Let's say who would it need to be? I don't know. I guess the player doesn't ultimately matter, but pick 10 comes around and Goody is absolutely in love with a player and he can get up from 25 to 10. Let's say it's 8. He needs to get it to pick 8, whatever. He needs to get 25 to 8 and he has a player that's A+ on his board and he can get up. But the only pick that the other team will accept is if Green Bay parts with its first round pick next year. But it's when the draft is in Green Bay. Would Goody be able to trade his first round pick in 2025, knowing that the draft is in Green Bay, Or is that just pick completely off limits? Is he basically told by the NFL, the powers that be, you cannot trade away your 2025 first round pick when that draft is in Green Bay?
I mean, you don't have an owner, and like Mark Murphy, this is his like swan song type of thing. But that is such a hard thing to do. I don't know if I've talked about it on here, but like there was a trade that the Chiefs were going to make 2 years ago when the draft was in Kansas City, and they, it got squashed by ownership because they were
Yeah.
like, "No, dude, you're not trading the first round pick when we're hosting the draft."
Yep.
The way Green Bay is kind of looking at it, and this is from their public statements. This isn't, sourced or anything like that. They're looking at it as like a viability thing for Northeast Wisconsin, right? And they're
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you know, we're gonna have to do a bunch of things because we don't have the like hotel support to bring in 250,000 people, right? For the draft, and we're gonna have shuttles from um Milwaukee and stuff like that and all that stuff. I I don't think they would risk not being able to get local fans in when they're probably going to have to draw local fans in more than some of these other places just because of the difficulty of getting to Green Bay. So I don't think so. I don't think it can happen. By the way, that player in this scenario would probably be Alter for Shanu,
I was thinking
which
like offensive line too. Yeah.
Packers fans, if you trade 2 first-round picks for an
For
offensive
offensive
lineman,
line.
they would probably freak out based off of how many people are just willing to plug and play and roll with Rasheed Walker right now.
There-
Anytime I bring up taking a tackle at 25.
There's really like nobody that makes super sense to give up 2 firsts for at that point in the draft that I could even, I mean, like you said, it's probably an offensive tackle and it's
Yeah.
probably just not worth it. Also, like Goody would be so allergic to making that type of trade just in general anyway, to give up a future first. I don't ever see that happening, but just a fun random question. Like I said, that'll never happen anyway. Justis, you are amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. Always appreciate it. Tell us all where we can find your amazing work.
AcmePackingCompany.com. We are pumping out content like no one's business right now. You can subscribe to the Acme Packing Company podcast feed wherever you find podcasts. Follow me on Twitter /X/whatever you call it at JUMOSQ. That's it, I think.
Go follow him. He's the absolute best. Always appreciate you coming on, Justis. You can find me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. But for Justis and I, until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.